prevent creation going into the textbooks. Or they will try to sue somebody who teaches creation in their class. They can't use logic, so they're going to use the law and make it illegal to teach a certain doctrine. That is just simply not common sense. In verse 47, they answered them, the Pharisees, "Are you also deceived?" Let me translate that. "Are you stupid? Since we don't believe any of it must not be right." This is exactly what the scientists are doing today. Some scientists are doing with their pupils. "Are you so dumb you believed in creation too?" And the average student in a public university is going to get all kinds of this kind of scoffing from at least one of his teachers will try to ridicule him if he believes in creation. In other words, all scientists believe in evolution and the scientific journals don't support creation, therefore it must be true. Well, I'll tell you what. Send in an article to a science journal that supports creation. Send in the article that supports creation to a science journal, and it won't be published. It's discrimination. "This people which know not the law are cursed," he said in John 7:49. In other words, we have knowledge, you don't. Let me see your degree, please. Nothing has changed, folks. In 2,000 years, they're using the exact same tactic they used on Jesus Christ. He said, "Doth our law judge any man before it hear him?" At least some of the non-believers had common sense enough to realize, hey, there's something to this. And if you're watching this tape or listening here today, and you have the common sense to realize, man, maybe evolution isn't true. Well, yay. Everybody ought to have enough common sense to figure that out. Many scientists down through history have believed in creation. We could start with Francis Bacon back in 1561 when he was born, who developed our scientific method. Johann Kepler, who developed scientific astronomy. Many people, we'll just flash some names up here quickly. All of these folks were creationists. Now, they weren't all biblical, young earth, Bible-believing creationists, though the majority were. And they weren't even all Christians, though many were. But they developed just about every major branch of science that we have today was developed by creationists. There's a great list of these with a lot of detail on them on the Answers in Genesis website, answersingenesis.org, where you can get this list and many other, lots of other good information about scientists who believe in creation. So these fellows all through history were creationists. They were not evolutionists. See, the evolution theory is like a leech. They come in and take over what somebody else has done. They don't produce anything on their own. Major branches of science developed by creationists. Just about everyone we have in the world today. As a matter of fact, some have argued they can't think of anything that the evolution theory has added to real science. The evolution theory has not helped us get to the moon. It didn't help us get computers or calculators. It hasn't done anything. One fellow argued, well, yeah, the evolution theory is how we explain modern medicine with bacteria mutating. Well, duh, it's still a bacteria. Okay? That's not evolution. It's a variation within the same strand. Still a bacteria. So people say, what about separation of church and state? Can you teach creation in schools? Well, this idea, this idea of separation of church and state is ridiculous. There is no such phrase mentioned in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it says, Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It does not say there is separation of church and state. That phrase was used in a letter by Thomas Jefferson to a pastor Danbury, a Baptist in Dayton, Connecticut in 1802. Jefferson said, the First Amendment has erected a wall of separation between church and state. By the way, this is a one-dimensional wall, which means the Congress cannot get involved in the church's business. But to get around that, they've tricked an awful lot of churches into becoming 501c3 corporations. See, the government creates and owns and regulates corporations, not the church. And a true church, a real Bible-believing, true New Testament church, is not incorporated and does not have 501c3 status. Because once you do that, you've put the church under the government. And they do have the authority to regulate you. Get rid of that corporation status and become a real true church, and a lot of your problems will disappear. Like in our ministry, we're a branch of a local New Testament Bible-believing unincorporated church. So when we build a building, we don't get a building permit. We can't, because that would be putting God under the government. Ask the folks at your local county building office, inspectors and stuff, ask them if a federal government came in here, if the federal government came in to build a building like the Navy base here in Pensacola, do you guys at the county inspect the Navy base? And they'll say, no. They have their own inspectors. We have no jurisdiction over them because they're federal. Exactly right. And you have no jurisdiction over a church if it is a real church. Now, for the last 100 years, so many churches have been incorporated, the average building inspector's never heard of that, and it drives them nuts to even consider that just maybe we don't have jurisdiction. But that they don't, okay, if it's a real and true New Testament church. Now, churches ought to build their stuff better than the county requires anyway, and we try to at our place, but they simply do not have jurisdiction. Okay, second question. How do we see stars that are billions of light years away? There is no question there are an awful lot of stars out there. The Bible says in Nehemiah, "Thou, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and the things that are therein." God created the heavens. Now, according to the evolution theory, stars evolve. It's interesting. Nobody's ever seen one star forming. Some have argued, well, in Crab Nebulae, we see some bright spots that we think are stars forming in this nursery that produces stars. Just a minute. You wouldn't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out. It could be you're not seeing a star forming. You're seeing the dust clearing and a star showing that was already behind it. I mean, if this had to go to a court of law, any freshman law student would make that argument, and you couldn't prove that's wrong. So there would certainly be very reasonable doubt that we're not seeing stars forming. Nobody's ever proven a star is forming. But yet there are trillions of stars out there. So if stars really evolve, star births ought to equal star deaths, and yet we don't see that happening. We see stars dying, exploding, burning up, novas and supernovas happen, but that's the opposite of evolution. We never see one form. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, God made the stars to be for signs and for seasons here on the earth. So, God made the stars. The Bible says He actually counts the number of the stars. Not only how many there are, but each one has a number, and He knows that number. When the Bible says He numbers the hairs of your head, it doesn't mean He knows how many hairs you have. He means He knows the number of each hair. This is hair number 174,219. He knows the number of every hair, and He knows the number of every star. There are enough stars out there that everybody on earth can own 2 trillion of them to yourself. Plenty to go around. And here we fight over a little bit of real estate. God's got loads of stuff for us out there in heaven. Okay, the Hubble telescope was asked to focus in on a dot, and for 10 continuous days they spotted this. They looked at this one spot north of the Big Dipper, or above the Big Dipper. This spot is about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. After watching it for 10 days, they thought this spot was black. There was nothing there. But after 10 days of continuous viewing, they discovered there are more stars than they could count. In that spot they previously thought had nothing. Now, even the evolutionists, like Stephen Hawking, who hates creationists, Stephen Hawking said, stars are so far away, they appear to us to be just pinpoints of light. We cannot see their size or shape. So how can we tell the different types of stars apart? For the vast majority of stars, there is only one characteristic feature we observe, the color of their light. What he said here is stars are so far away, all we see is the color of their light. We cannot see their size or shape. When you look at the sun through a telescope, of course, you can see the various, flames leaping off and all this kind of stuff. You don't see any of that with stars. You get the biggest telescope in the world, all you see is a dot when you look at a star. You do not see the features of a star, so keep that thought in mind. If you're going to tell the distance to an object you cannot touch, like a star, or across Grand Canyon, the way you tell the distance to something you can't actually go measure, one way to tell the difference is to use trigonometry. I taught high school trig for years. It's not that complicated. If you get 2 observation points looking at a third point, if you know the distance between your observation points, and you know the angle that they form looking toward this third point, you can actually calculate the unknown distance using sine, cosine, or tangent. Simple high school trig, I could teach you how to do it in 15 minutes if you don't know. Well, we got this same problem when you're looking at stars. The Earth is only 8,000 miles in diameter. So if 2 people are on opposite sides of the Earth looking at a star, 8,000 miles is nothing compared to star distance. So we need to get a greater base on our triangle. So what they've done to enlarge the base is they look at the star in January, then they look at the star in June, and you now have a huge base on your triangle. The problem is the distance from the sun to the Earth is 93 million miles, which is 8 light minutes. It's called 1 astronomical unit, which means the diameter of our orbit as we circle around the sun is 16 light minutes. Now, that's a